This is the Candidly Kim podcast.
Welcome to the Candidly Kim podcast. We've got a great show tonight. We are here with Jonathan Butcher, who just walked off the stage of the CRT forum. That is looks like to be a pretty good full house out there, a big, important topic on the minds of parents and the general public that is concerned about this issue. So we have one of the nation's experts on this subject, and we're going to talk about several things. We're going to talk about school choice as well, some education choice, some model policies, some initiatives out there, and some of the research that Jonathan's been involved in. So I want to tell you a little bit about Jonathan. I met Jonathan when I was serving on an education task force with ALEC, with the American Legislative Exchange Council, and then I served as the chair of the Center to Protect Free Speech, where a lot of you know that's been kind of my issue, the campus free speech issues, and if you've also been following, you know that we ran legislation for 6 years and really had trouble in a supermajority Republican legislature, Republican governor to get this passed. And we now have it in kind of a soft form where we recognize the standards that we tried to get in legislation for years. But there's just no penalties or consequences for schools that continue to violate students' rights to free speech. And I think for the 6 years that we talked about it in education, task forces and education coalitions, it was fairly conceptual with lots of problem anecdotes and stories of students whose rights have been violated in this way. But now we've come around the corner and we see some of these education issues that did you ever imagine we would be where we are in America in education, in public education, and the things that are being taught to our students, and the way that students and parents have been silenced and shamed, and most recently threatened as criminals, as being labeled as even domestic terrorists. So again, let me tell you a little bit about Jonathan Butcher. He is the Will Skillman Fellow in Education at the Heritage Foundation. He is the author of Splintered, Critical Race Theory, and the Progressive War on Truth. So I'd love you to talk about the book a little bit. And served as the South Carolina State Charter School Board. So that's very interesting to me, as I'm a founder of one of the longest running charter schools in Utah, Monticello Academy. In 2017, he was co-recipient of the State Policy Network's Bob Williams Award for the most influential research for a proposal to protect free speech on campus. And some of that work was alongside Stanley Kurtz, also ALEC, in where we were all working on some of this policy together, Jim Manley at the Goldwater Institute. Jonathan previously served as the education director at the Goldwater Institute, so you may remember his work there as well, and he still remains a senior fellow. A member of the Arizona Department of Education's first steering committee for the Empowerment Scholarship accounts, and that's the nation's first education savings account program. So let's touch on all of that just a little bit. Really, just thank you for being with us tonight, and you're traveling, so thank you for making some time.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, you just walked off the stage of the CRT, Critical Race Theory Forum here in Utah. What do we need to know about this? Besides that it doesn't really exist, and anybody that thinks it does is crazy. So you're the king of crazy, and trying to stoke, make-believe.
Well, I'm in good company. I have some colleagues at Heritage and in other institutions like Chris Rufo and Parents Defending Education, who are also working very hard to protect children from racial discrimination. And that's really what we're after. I think what is new, you made a great comment at the beginning talking about how the position that we're in today with parents and schools, and how have we ever been in this situation before? And I do think that because public schools live at the intersection of a public policy and culture that we have been here, right? I think there has always been a tussling over what kids are taught because parents have values and beliefs, and it's different from community to community. What's different, though, is what you said next, which is the intimidation of parents and to have a government being driven by a special interest group, and I'm talking about the National School Boards Association, actually compel them to call parents dangerous.
Right. And what the nth degree of being labeled a domestic terrorist is pretty significant. I mean, that is a crime. That is a federal crime. And these are our parents. And so there is a debate right now, a very active debate just in the last 2 to 3 days, is do parents have the right to influence the content of the education? Do parents have the right to show up to a school board meeting and demand that something be taught or not be taught? And the fact that there is somebody on the other side of that argument saying, yeah, no, they don't. So you've spoken about this recently. So what is the parent right?
Well, sure. I mean, they most certainly do. I mean, not only are they parents, but they're also taxpayers and voters, right? They elect the school board members who are supposed to represent them. I mean, school boards have responsibilities, right? It is a part of their responsibility to choose the curriculum and the textbooks, as well as a variety of other operational policies that a school board or that a school district will operate under, right? But to say that that as a school board, you can override or ignore what your parents are telling you is nonsense, right? It's their responsibility to be reflecting what the voters that put them there, for.
So it's facially absurd, but it also just makes no logical sense. These are people that have to stand before those same voters at some point and justify that they just spent time telling you to go away, shut up, you're dumb. And we just saw there's a video that's gone out of a school board member who really, under her breath, was caught on a hot mic disparaging a parent that was speaking very, sincerely about these things, and it's just sort of that. What is it? Is it arrogance? What is it?
Well, it's hard to say what the motivation is. I would argue that there's always a struggle for power over both at the local level, at Congress, wherever you go, right? And you know this very well from the state legislature. I think what school board members really should know is that Axios, a news site, was reporting earlier this year that about 51 recall elections have either been staged or a political effort begun to stage them between January and July of this year. That's double the number of the entire year in 2020. So just so you know, voters aren't taking this lying down.
No, and that's education is at the forefront of these things, and whether it's been the COVID responses, lockdowns, forced mask wearing, or that parents all of a sudden started looking over their child's shoulder in a Zoom class, which interestingly, there was an effort across the country at different places to make sure parents couldn't do that, that some parents were being restricted from being able to look over their shoulders. And then all of a sudden they found some things, they saw some things that troubled them. I wonder if it wasn't for that, if parents would maybe still be in the dark about some of that. But for whatever reason, these things have come together. And just absolutely crazy. I watched the Merrick Garland hearings about the letters, the letter that came from the National School Boards Association encouraging then that conversation about parents being criminalized as
essentially demanding.
terrorists.
I mean, I think encouraging is doesn't even get that far. I mean, I think, and there is evidence from emails that the School Board Association worked with the White House prior to the release of the letter, and then the staff of the School Board Association sent the letter, and now the board of the National School Board Association is apologizing for having sent the letter in the first place.
So it's all okay now because they apologized. So, it's all okay, and we can move on now because they apologized.
Well, the issue now is that state school board associations are leaving. So
Right.
Pennsylvania, Ohio, Louisiana, Missouri, New Hampshire just announced. I think there are 5 now.
So I just want to make a quick point that I got a phone call from a mom really, really upset the other day that Utah was not on the list of state boards withdrawing, and that's because we're not in it in the first place anyway. So there's another association out there that Utah participates in. So don't go crucify the state board for not joining the list. They were kind of smart enough in the first place to not join it. CRT. What do you want us to know about CRT?
So I'll say 2 things. So let's talk about the background very briefly, and then I want to talk about a myth that I think is in the media all the time. So the background, where does it come from? Critical race theory came from critical legal theory, which swept through law schools in the 1970s, which itself came from critical theory, which is a neo-Marxist idea that came out of Germany in the 1920s. And a group of largely Jewish scholars, and that's important for a moment, were developing this concept that Marxism had failed in Germany while it had succeeded in Russia, and so they were very frustrated as Germans and were looking for a way to rejuvenate Marxism. They combined it with sort of a relativistic view that there's no authentic truth. The Nazis chased these Jewish intellectuals out of Germany, and eventually they bounced around Europe, landed at Columbia University in 1937. That's where they settled and influenced generations of academics. Quick example, Herbert Marcuse, one of the original from the Frankfurt School, which is what that group was called. His most famous student was Angela Davis, who of course was the suspected of providing guns to a group of violent radicals who murdered a judge in California in the 1970s. She was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Anyway, so you have this move from critical theory emanating out of Marxism into critical legal theory, which said that American law is systemically oppressive. And the critical race theorists in 1989, led by Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, and others, said the critical legal theorists were almost right. They got almost there, but we have to add race on top. It's not just American law that's systemically oppressive. America is irredeemable. America is systemically racist and will always be, and there's no fixing that. And in fact, that was the title of Derek Bell's book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, The Persistence of Racism, or it might have been The Permanence of Racism, but either way, right? It's that it's always there, there's nothing that we can do. So that's where it came from. The myth that really has to be broken today is that critical race theory is not in K-12 schools, and that it's not happening. And
okay, and that is the mantra here in Utah. It doesn't really exist. In fact, I spoke to a school administrator that I'm fairly close to recently that just said, it really isn't in our schools. It's just not. What should parents look for? Like a lot of things that we get from the left, it's sort of packaged neater.
That's right.
Or stealthily and camouflaged. What does it look like, and what should we be looking for?
So sometimes they'll use the words critical race theory. So you can see Portland Public Schools has a critical race theory working group. They post their videos online. The Hayward Unified Public School District across the bay from San Francisco put out a memo to their school community saying that they're going to keep critical race theory in the classrooms, et cetera. So sometimes they'll just use the words. Other times it will go under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion, multicultural education. Lately, it's been showing up in socio-emotional learning textbooks. It takes the form of revised math today. There's actually a curriculum that was created and funded by the Gates Foundation that large districts such as LA are using today called, I can't even remember what the title is. It's a math curriculum, though, that reorients all math instruction around critical race theory. And it says that you need to teach math in order to teach students to be revolutionaries, and to go out from underneath the white oppression. And so this is a part of the math curriculum that it's based around.
So diversity, equity, inclusion, those are they're aspirational things that aren't wrong in and of themselves. So how do those things enter our schools in a way that should concern us?
That's a great question. They are benign terms, if not beneficial ideas, right? But diversity will show up in mandatory affinity groups, where you will have a school separate students based on the color of their skin for different school activities, which, by the way, is illegal. But there's a lawsuit in Illinois right now where a teacher has said this is what they did, and so she's suing the Evanston School District. Same thing. Look, Boston Public Schools has on their website that they will use affinity groups. So I don't think they're being shy about this idea that we should separate students based on the color of their skin. So diversity, equity is replacing equality, right? Equality means that the law is, you are all equal under the law, right? The law is not will not discriminate based on your immutable characteristics. Equity means that the government will generate the same outcomes for everyone, which of course can only be done through coercion. Right. And there are school boards today who are putting in their mission statements that they will generate the same outcomes for all students, which for students at the bottom of the achievement scale, that's bad news. Inclusion is actually exclusion. You have the Black Lives Matter movement pushing these 13 goals, which include the idea that they want to disrupt the nuclear family. Mm-hmm. So inclusion for everybody else, except if you're in a nuclear family.
Wow. Okay, so what's the answer? What do we do? And sometimes parents don't always feel empowered to go, or they feel empowered to go, but they don't always have the right language or the right focus. And what can we use? What are good tools to approach our education governors with?
Well, so I think the first is do speak at your school board meeting. I mean, the idea that you should be able to go and practice free expression is one of the oldest of American values. No one should act in violence. No one should practice censorship. But yes, right, the school board and the school board meeting, that is the place in which we should have a conversation about our culture. So that's the first. I think secondly, and something that we've been working on at the Heritage Foundation and has been picked up by different states, including parts of Texas's proposal, Louisiana, New Hampshire, South Carolina, is this idea that in a state proposal, you can say no teacher or student should be compelled to affirm, profess, believe any idea that violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So ideas such as America is systemically racist, or individuals based on the color of their skin should receive additional benefits or sanctions, right? So that's the first part of the proposal, and that none of those ideas should be a part of K-12 curriculum or different professional training programs. Okay,
so now you pointed out that a lot of this took decades to develop. Mm-hmm. If you're a cynical parent or maybe a realist parent, we're not going to change that back overnight either. So what do you advise to parents that, the life, a year in the life of a child is really very impactful, very, very long, and do we have time to wait to have our education revolutions and turn over school boards and things like that and have curriculum rewritten? What do you advise to parents that it's not happening? They're stuck in the California school, that there's no interest in changing these things. Yeah. So kind of touching on school choice initiatives out there, what are you seeing across the country? What's working?
2021 was a big year for school choice. We had 18 states create or expand existing school choice programs. I mean, that's very exciting. Never had that number happen all in the same year.
And Utah was one that we
That's right.
we passed our first tax credit scholarship program. It's called Children First Education Fund, and it has an ESA component to that as well. So we're very excited, hoping that grows. I'm very involved in that effort as well in our state. But
yeah, and that's exactly what we're seeing in places like North Carolina, which has an ESA program. Arizona, as you said, has the oldest in the nation. Florida now has the largest in the country. West Virginia just passed one that will be available to every child can apply in the state of West Virginia.
So that's incredible. So Utah's right now only benefits students with disabilities, but watching our Florida governor announced a couple months ago that they were expanding it to include all kinds of students. It's almost every student, effectively. Arizona also
has a variety of categories.
Absolutely. So just about every student can access one of these scholarships in some of our states. We're just starting in Utah. It's a baby program, so I hope we keep moving. So on the ESA, you've worked on some ESA research, and what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, my latest report for the John Locke Foundation, they're headquartered in North Carolina, looked at the most recent, the youngest ESA program, and how the first couple of years of that program went for parents. So the early adopters, how did they use their child's account? And I found that more than 60% of these families used their child's account exactly in the way that ESAs were intended, which is for more than one education product or service simultaneously.
Nice.
So it's not just a scholarship, which is great, right? Vouchers and private school scholarships have served kids around the country for years, but with an ESA, you can pay for a textbook, you can pay for a personal tutor, you can pay for educational therapies for a child with special needs, you can pay for private school tuition, you can save for college, right? And so you have families all over North Carolina using the accounts in these very flexible ways. And that's very exciting as we think about the 21st century, right? And as we think about, what education is going to look like in the future.
Well, exactly. And for Utah's, again, I'm just going to plug this real quick, childrenfirsteducationfund.org. That ESA component, the scholarship does cover tuition to private schools, but it also covers that whole range. Therapies by licensed, clinical therapists, but also the textbooks, the courses, the online courses, things like that, those supplemental things. And so we can envision a family really creating a very customized education for their child. And that should not be so unique, and it should not be hard to access.
It shouldn't be unusual, right? It shouldn't be the exception to the rule, right? It should be what is available to every family.
So we're hoping we get there as a state, and I do hear that, there's some legislation coming. And so what else are you working on that you're watching that you'd like us to pay attention to?
So my book Splintered will be out in March. It's available for pre-order now on Amazon. And the book talks about not just critical race theory and its origins like we were talking about here, but this issue of free speech on campus. Because I think there has been, as people have watched the shout-downs and the heckler's veto and the disinvitations and all the different ways in which you've seen speakers lose their ability to listen and be heard on college campuses, I think that, we appropriately addressed it as a free speech issue, but it was coming from students who had been immersed in these ideas from critical theory for years from their professors.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I felt the pushback was, students to administrations who push back on our legislation. So this is what I need to know. How soon will Splintered be on audio so that I can listen to it when I'm in traffic?
All right. Well, I know that it's being released March 8th is the date that we've got so far. We're trying to get it out as soon as we can. I think the paper shortage is hurting authors like me. So, but we're excited, and I hope that it'll be available in every format as soon as we can.
That's great. That's great. So I'd love to talk to you about it when it comes out, and maybe have you come back again, because you do great work in heritage. Love heritage and the great value they are to our country on really good issues surrounding our freedoms and just core American values. And so I want to thank you again for being on with us. Where can people follow you? Where are you? On social media?
So you can find us at heritage.org. You can find our critical race theory work at heritage.org/CRT. I'm on Twitter at JM_Butcher.
Okay. And any of the other platforms?
No,
there's too many. I can't keep up. Right? Okay, and can you plug Heritage Action, or are you firewalled with Action?
Sure. I mean, Heritage Action is our great sister organization. They work around the country, both at the state level as well as in Washington, and they work very hard to provide transparency over what is going on with our elected officials, as well as with holding them accountable for what they told voters they were going to do. So
absolutely, I was grateful for that. So I just want to put a plug out to everybody out there. Sometimes your school board races, your state board of education, they might not be the most exciting races out there, especially come 22, where there's just going to be so much on the ballot, so many issues out there. But, we're learning now how absolutely vital it is to be involved in that local school board election. If you don't like what's coming out of a teacher in a classroom, talk to the teacher. If you have to, go to the principal and then to your school board rep. You all have one. You all have a school board rep, and you have a state board of education that we will have some pretty good competitive elections next year for state board of education, and a number of the board members would like to make some changes in these areas that we're talking about to make sure students are not compelled to try to adopt things that go against even their families' sincerely held beliefs or their own. So a lot of work to do. So follow these races. Watch Jonathan. Follow a lot of great information he's putting out there along with Heritage. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we look forward to being with you next time. Have a good night.